This program is presented by the Corporation for Fictitious Broadcasting and made possible by donors like you. This week, we direct our attention to the 8th continent, to a country nestled off the coast of the Nauru Sea. Join us as we take a look back at the brief but turbulent history of the fledgling nation known as Carana. Carana, a breathtakingly beautiful country. Lush jungles, sprawling for hundreds of miles, give way to the agricultural lowlands which feed much of the population, and the coastlines where urban centers have historically driven the country's commerce. But there is another side to this 8th continent nation. Violence and economic hardship comprise much of Carana's recent history. Carana is located on the east coast of the 8th continent. With Galassi as its capital city, it is bordered by Sumara in the north, Kataisi in the west, and Ramosa in the south. Carana currently has a population of approximately 15 million. In 1919, French troops defeated the Italian colonists and gained control of Carana. Exotic timber from the western and southern jungles, alluvial diamonds and copper from the south all flowed to the ports and onward to foreign markets. The period from 1951 to 1955 was marked with growing civil unrest based on the increasingly popular movement for national liberation. This resulted in Carana's becoming a legal republic of the French community in 1955, followed by full independence in 1962. Following independence, the largest of the liberation movements, led by Joseph Uroma, consolidated power in the capital city of Galassi, backed by supporters from his majority ethnic group, the Fallen. 90% of Carana's population is made up of 3 ethnic groups: the Fallen, Kori, and Tatsi. The Fallen are the ethnic majority in the country at 46% and live mostly in the east and center of Carana. The Kori make up 33% and live primarily in the west. The Tatsi comprise 11% and are concentrated in the south. The remaining 10% of the population are made up of 12 smaller ethnic groups geographically distributed across the country. By the 1970s, Uroma's Soviet-backed centralized government was failing, as evidenced by a faltering economy and ineffective governance. A succession of army-led coups, first under Christian Hakatu and then Jean-Michel Tarraconi, perpetuated economic decline and social upheaval. This instability culminated in a humanitarian crisis, with widespread hunger and disease, which ultimately necessitated intervention by the United Nations to avoid catastrophic human suffering. Under UN supervision, elections were held in 1986, and Jackson Ogavo, a Fallen and the leader of the Parti Démocratique de Carana, was elected the first president of Carana. Ogavo created a fairly ethnically balanced government, representing all 3 of the main ethnic groups: Fallen, Kori, and Tatsi. During the early years, incremental economic and social reforms began to reverse the previous 2 decades of deterioration. Signs of progress included the state establishment of the coal mining industry and construction of hydroelectric dams to power the economy. The new democratic principles were manifested into a constitution in 1991. However, beginning in 1995, Ogavo's focus changed, and he became preoccupied with suppressing all opposition groups and enhancing his own power base. Ogavo methodically replaced Kori and Tatsi government ministers with his own Fallen tribe members, loyal to him but often unqualified. In 1998, this patronage system culminated in economic collapse. Since that time, and over the course of the war that would follow, the economy has declined, with negative growth, high unemployment, and the disintegration of industry and natural resource exports that have comprised Carana's livelihood. As the export of timber, diamonds, and copper declined, government revenues fell and inflation increased. As a result of the economic situation and discrimination against Kori and Tutsi by the government, political opposition groups and rebel movements emerged. In 2000, a rebel movement by the name of the Kori Movement Patriotique de Carana, or MPC, began gaining momentum in the West. A second rebel group, the Independent Combatants de Sud Carana, or ICSC, loosely comprised of smaller pockets of combatants, emerged in the South. By 2004, widespread fighting had pushed the government's Carana Defense Force and the gendarmerie out of much of the countryside. The Civil War, which would directly claim over 10,000 lives, left a devastated infrastructure and displaced nearly 200,000 people from conflict areas to the coast. The war also left behind a legacy of landmines and unexploded ordnance, which continued to cause the loss of innocent life and the disruption of agricultural activity. As part of the 8th Continent Regional Coalition, or CRC, Carana drew concern from the 11 other member nations for its growing instability. Last year, a ceasefire agreement, known as the Kalari Treaty, was signed between the Carana government and rebel forces, largely due to the efforts of the CRC. The Government of National Reconciliation, or GNR, was quickly established. Former Finance Minister Lucien Lingata was selected to be Prime Minister of the GNR. Following establishment of the GNR, Ogavo was indicted for crimes against humanity and corruption. Unfortunately, he was tipped off prior to the indictment being served and disappeared. He is believed to be in exile in Sumara, protected by former members of his presidential guard. 8 months after the establishment of the GNR through the signing of the Kalari Treaty, a national election for president was held. According to the Kalari Treaty, the consensus prime minister was not permitted to stand as a candidate for president. Despite this, the PDC threatened a walkout of the GNR if Lingata was not permitted to run. Lingata was elected president with 55% of the popular vote. In a show of unity, Lingata, himself a fallen, appointed Jean Mtata, a former Kori MPC rebel leader and runner-up in the presidential elections, as Carana's prime minister. The Kalari Treaty specified that the GNR would establish a national commission to oversee regrouping and disarmament, demobilization, and reintegration of former combatants as necessary. The treaty also placed a limit on the armed forces of Carana that would not exceed 15,000 troops. Additional security is currently being maintained by the United Nations Assistance to Carana, a 10,000-member peacekeeping force. Despite some delays, there has been progress toward peace in Carana. The international community is renewing its interest in the nation, and there is much work to be done. 200,000 refugees still displaced, landmines scattered across the country, roads, rail, and electricity out of commission, a high risk of epidemic disease outbreaks, and an unresolved year-old coal miners' strike. With help, perhaps progress can be made toward improving the health, infrastructure, and economy of this small country, reversing the ravages of civil war. The people are hopeful that the fighting is over and that the lost decades of growth and prosperity can be reclaimed, and that, perhaps, Carana has reached a turning point.